My girlfriend cheated on me and said I'd never find anyone like her because she was out of my league. A year later, I started dating a model who had a crush on me since high school. Beginning. So I was scrolling through Reddit the other day, and I came across this post about a guy whose girlfriend was cheating on him, and she didn't even care. She was completely open about it, like it was no big deal. It was wild, and it got me thinking about my own ex-girlfriend. I haven't really told this story to many people, mostly because it's kind of long, and well, it was pretty painful at the time. But after reading that post, I figured, what the heck, might as well give it a shot. This all happened about 2 years ago, so keep that in mind. I met my ex, let's call her Vanessa, at a sustainable architecture workshop in downtown Boston. I was there giving a presentation on eco-friendly renovations for historical buildings. I'm an architect with a mid-sized firm here in the city. She claimed she was interested in incorporating sustainable elements into her boutique's design, though looking back, I think she was more interested in networking with the wealthy developers who attended these events. I was 34 at the time, and she was 32. We exchanged numbers, started chatting, and there was this immediate connection between us. It's hard to explain, but we just clicked. We had the same sense of humor, seemed to enjoy similar things, and could talk for hours without getting bored. Her intelligence and confidence were captivating, and I found myself constantly thinking about our conversations. After a couple of weeks of texting and phone calls, I finally asked her out for dinner at this little Italian place I love. I was honestly nervous because she was stunningly beautiful. I mean, genuinely gorgeous. The kind of woman who makes people turn their heads when she walks into a room. And while I'm not insecure about my appearance, I couldn't help but notice the social gap between us. I'm a regular guy who grew up in a middle-class family and worked my way through state college with scholarships. Vanessa, as I later learned, came from old money and had attended an exclusive private university. I remember thinking I probably shouldn't get too invested because women from her world tend to view guys like me as temporary diversions. The anxiety churned in my stomach as I waited for her at the restaurant, my hands fidgeting with the napkin. "You look like you're planning to escape," she said when she arrived, catching me off guard with her perceptiveness. Despite my concerns, she said yes to a second date, then a third. Being with Vanessa was exhilarating, like being swept up in a whirlwind. We became exclusive within a month. The first time she invited me to her luxury condo in downtown Boston, I felt like I'd stepped into a different universe. The contrast with my modest apartment in the suburbs was stark, but she never commented on it directly. One thing that always lingered in the back of my mind was the attention she received from other men. She'd mention it casually, even when we were together, like how some guy would openly flirt with her right in front of me, or how her social media was flooded with messages from admirers. Her Instagram account had thousands of followers, and she clearly enjoyed the validation. Marcus from the Henderson account wouldn't stop texting me after that meeting. She'd say it with a little smile that seemed to communicate both annoyance and pleasure. At first, I wasn't bothered much by these comments. I trusted her. I genuinely believed she was into me, not anyone else. Looking back, I was blinded by her charm and beauty, content just to be with her. I didn't want to be that insecure, jealous boyfriend who questions everything. Things were going well for the most part, except for one incident that kept nagging at me. About 6 months into our relationship, I'd spent weeks working on a detailed architectural model of a weekend home I thought we might build together someday. It was my anniversary gift to her, a tangible symbol of our potential future. When I presented it, she glanced at it briefly, said, "Oh, that's nice, babe," and immediately returned to scrolling through her phone. The model sat collecting dust on her bookshelf, untouched and unmentioned again. Around the same time, we were having one of those late-night conversations where you talk about silly hypotheticals, and the topic of celebrity hall passes came up. If you're not familiar, it's that hypothetical situation where you each pick one celebrity you'd be allowed to sleep with without it counting as cheating. It's supposed to be lighthearted fun, but sometimes it reveals deeper attitudes. She brought it up, which surprised me since I'm usually the one who initiates playful conversations like that. She said her hall pass was Justin Timberlake, which seemed reasonable enough. But then she added something that truly bothered me. "I don't think there are many celebrities who would say no to me," she said with a smirk that felt coldly calculating. "I have the right connections and the right look. It's just a matter of being in the right place." That comment hit me like a slap. I knew Vanessa was beautiful, but hearing her talk about herself that way revealed an arrogance I hadn't fully recognized before. It was as if she was casually acknowledging that she could have virtually any man she wanted, including me, and I should consider myself lucky. The comment felt especially jarring because until then, she generally acted down to earth despite her privileged background. This new side of her made me deeply uncomfortable. I didn't say anything in the moment, just forced a laugh and changed the subject. But that comment stuck with me, playing on repeat in my mind for days afterward. Eventually, the immediate sting faded, but I never completely forgot it. It was the first crack in how I saw her. Things ran smoothly for a while after that uncomfortable exchange, but then I began noticing shifts in her behavior. Subtle at first, but increasingly obvious with time. She started coming home later than usual. Normally, she'd be back from the boutique around 6 o'clock, but she began returning at 7 o'clock, 7:30, sometimes even later. And her explanations became frustratingly vague. "Lost track of time at this fashion industry mixer," she'd say, dropping her designer handbag on the counter. Or, "ran into Alessandra from Milan, and we had to catch up over drinks," without offering any details. It was strange because she used to share specifics about her day, which clients she'd helped, what new inventory had arrived, even office politics at the boutique. Now everything was glossed over with these dismissive, half-formed excuses. During this period, I also noticed an increasing number of luxury items appearing in her wardrobe, brands that were expensive even by her standards. When I casually asked about a new watch that must have cost thousands, she vaguely mentioned a business contact in the industry who'd given her a special discount. And her attitude changed, too. She became irritable, particularly when I asked about her schedule. If I inquired why she was late, she'd snap at me, her eyes flashing with annoyance. "Why are you monitoring my movements?" she'd demand. "Don't you trust me?" This controlling behavior is really unattractive, Elliot. I'd usually back off, not wanting to escalate things. Confrontation has never been my strong suit, especially with someone who is clearly spoiling for a fight. But the late nights continued, and the dismissive explanations kept coming. Meanwhile, when I shared news about my promotion at work, a project designing a sustainable community center that I was genuinely proud of, she barely looked up from her phone. My suspicions grew like a shadow, darkening everything. It was a persistent voice in my head, whispering, "Something isn't right here." I tried to dismiss it, but the evidence kept mounting. Finally, I directly asked if something was wrong. "Is everything okay, Vanessa? You seem different lately," I said one evening as she walked in at nearly 9 p.m. "Nothing's wrong," she replied with a practiced smile. "I'm just stressed about the boutique's seasonal turnover. You know how it gets." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe her. But the distance between us was becoming impossible to ignore. A few days later, after our conversation where I confronted her about my concerns, things actually seemed to improve, at least on the surface. She became more receptive, more communicative. She'd text me during the day with little updates or photos of new store displays at the boutique. When she came home late, she'd offer these elaborate explanations about industry events or impromptu meetings with suppliers. But something felt hollow about these stories. The way her eyes would drift to the side as she spoke, the convenient lack of verifiable details, the slight hesitation before answering direct questions. One particular Tuesday night, she came home smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't mine, her lipstick slightly smudged. She launched into a story about running into an old colleague from fashion school and having drinks to discuss potential collaboration. The way she kept fiddling with her bracelet while talking, a nervous habit I'd noticed before when she was uncomfortable, triggered something in me. In that moment, clarity hit me like a physical force. I can't explain exactly how I knew, but the certainty was overwhelming. Vanessa was having an affair. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or me being paranoid. This was a deliberate betrayal. The woman who'd moved through my apartment, hanging up her coat, was a stranger wearing my girlfriend's face. I felt a strange calmness descend over me as I watched her continue her performance, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind raced. I couldn't ignore this or pretend everything was fine. I had to know the complete truth to see the full extent of her deception. My architect's mind needed to see the structural failure clearly before I could even think about what came next. That night, while she slept beside me, I considered checking her phone. That's where all the evidence would be, right? Text messages, emails, social media DMs. But I quickly abandoned the idea. Vanessa was practically attached to her phone. It was either in her hand or tucked under her pillow while she slept. Even if I somehow managed to access it, she was meticulous about maintaining her digital image. She would have been equally careful about hiding her tracks. Besides, I wanted irrefutable proof, not just a suspicious message that she could explain away or claim I misinterpreted. I needed to know beyond any shadow of doubt. After a sleepless night of weighing my options, I made a decision that felt both extreme and necessary. I would hire a private investigator. It sounds dramatic, like something from a noir film, but I was past caring how it looked. I needed the truth, and I needed someone skilled to help me uncover it. I wanted to know who this person was, where they were meeting, how long it had been going on, the complete architectural blueprint of her deception. I researched private investigators in Boston and found one whose office was housed in a beautifully restored Victorian brownstone in Back Bay. The historical architecture of the building momentarily distracted me from my purpose as I approached the entrance, noting the preserved original woodwork and tastefully updated windows. Lawrence Griffin had excellent reviews, specializing in infidelity cases with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Walking into his office felt like admitting defeat, like I was cementing my suspicions by seeking professional help. The space was warmly lit, with exposed brick walls and period-appropriate fixtures. Clearly someone who appreciated historical preservation had designed it. Lawrence himself was a man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and silver temples who looked like he'd seen every variation of human deception possible. "The coffered ceiling is original to the building," he remarked, noticing my gaze traveling upward. "You have a good eye." "I'm an architect," I explained, surprising myself with how normal my voice sounded despite the circumstances. "Then you'll appreciate that we preserved as many original elements as possible during the renovation," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a leather chair across from his desk. "Now, Mr. Reynolds, tell me what brings you here." I laid out the whole situation, starting with the hall pass conversation and moving through the pattern of late nights, vague excuses, and changed behavior. I felt embarrassed at first, but his non-judgmental demeanor made it easier. He simply listened, occasionally jotting notes, nodding at key points. "Your observational skills are quite developed," he commented when I finished. "Most people miss the subtle changes you've picked up on. That's an asset in your profession, I imagine." "I notice details in spaces," I admitted. "People are more complicated." "Not as complicated as they think," Lawrence replied. patterns of behavior are surprisingly consistent. Based on what you've described, I'd recommend surveillance for about 10 days. Her schedule seems irregular enough that we need that time to establish patterns. Ideally, I'd prefer 2 weeks, but that gets considerably more expensive. We settled on the 10-day plan. I provided all the information he needed: her phone number, email, workplace details, regular haunts, and typical schedule. He explained his methods and what I could expect. "Don't contact me before the 10 days are up unless there's an emergency," he instructed. "And try to maintain normal behavior at home. Don't give her any reason to be more cautious than usual." I agreed, already dreading the waiting period ahead. Those 10 days were some of the longest of my life. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid being alone with my thoughts in our apartment. I focused obsessively on a community center design, revising and refining details that didn't need changing, just to keep my mind occupied. Still, sleep became elusive, and when it came, it was haunted by images of Vanessa with faceless strangers. To make matters worse, during those 10 days, Vanessa's late nights continued. 3 times she returned after 9 o'clock, each time with increasingly flimsy excuses. The sales rep for that Italian designer finally returned my call, or traffic on the expressway was at a standstill. With each late return, I maintained a calm facade while thinking, "This is it. This is when Lawrence will catch her." Each late night was another opportunity for evidence to accumulate. I channeled my anxiety into a small personal project, designing a modest but elegant single-bedroom home that represented everything I wanted for myself: simplicity, authenticity, and harmony with its surroundings. It was therapeutic, creating something whole and honest, while my relationship was crumbling under the weight of lies. Finally, the 10 days concluded. Lawrence called precisely when he said he would. His voice revealed nothing, as he simply stated he had the information I'd requested and asked if I wanted to meet in person. I immediately agreed. This wasn't something I could process over the phone. I needed to be sitting across from him, reading his expression, seeing the evidence with my own eyes. I drove to his office with my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my stomach knotted with dread and anticipation. The restored brownstone that had impressed me on my first visit now seemed ominous, a place where painful truths would be revealed. Lawrence was waiting behind his desk, a thick manila envelope placed precisely in front of him. The room's warm lighting now seemed oppressive rather than welcoming. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat down, feeling lightheaded. "Before we begin," he said, "would you prefer I simply explain my findings, or would you rather review the contents of this envelope yourself?" "Tell me first," I replied, my voice sounding far away even to my own ears. "I need a moment to prepare." He nodded understandingly. "In my experience, it's like removing a bandage. Sometimes hearing the facts straightforwardly is less painful than prolonging the anticipation." He took a deep breath and said simply, "Your suspicions were correct, Mr. Reynolds." The words hit me with physical force, despite their gentleness. Lawrence continued in the same measured tone, explaining that he had followed Vanessa to a luxury condominium building in Beacon Hill on 3 separate occasions during the surveillance period. Each time, she entered alone and left approximately 2 hours later with the same man. Through his investigation, Lawrence had identified the man as Marcus Thornton, a high-end real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. "He has quite a reputation in certain social circles," Lawrence added, "both professionally and otherwise. My first thought was to track down this Marcus guy and, well, let's just say my emotions weren't trending toward peaceful dialogue. But I caught myself. This wasn't about him. The focus needed to be on Vanessa, the woman I'd trusted, who had systematically betrayed that trust. Lawrence slid the manila envelope across his desk. "Take your time," he said quietly. I opened it with trembling fingers, and there they were, dozens of high-quality photographs. Vanessa and a tall, expensively dressed man outside a sleek high-rise. Them embracing in the building's lobby, his hand on the small of her back as they entered an elevator. Them kissing passionately beside her car before parting. The same scene repeated on different days, at different times, but always with the same intimate familiarity. The images were devastatingly clear, professionally captured, and utterly undeniable. Something crumbled inside me as I stared at these concrete proofs. It was one thing to suspect the betrayal, to feel it instinctively, but seeing it documented so thoroughly was overwhelming. My vision blurred as I flipped through photo after photo. In one particularly painful image, Vanessa was laughing up at this Marcus person with an expression of genuine delight I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "There's also this," Lawrence said gently, passing me another photo. It showed them entering a high-end jewelry store together. This was taken yesterday. They spent nearly an hour inside. I managed to maintain my composure, but just barely. My hands gripped the edges of the photos so tightly they began to crease. It wasn't just the affair itself, though that was painful enough. It was the casual destruction of everything I'd believed in, the future I'd imagined with her, the trust I'd given completely. All of it now lay in ruins, like a beautifully designed building reduced to rubble. "What happens next is entirely up to you," Lawrence said after giving me a moment. "Some clients want more information. Others have seen enough." "This is enough," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "More than enough." After settling my account, I left with the envelope of evidence tucked under my arm. I drove to our favorite cafe, the place where we'd had our first date after the workshop, and sat at an outdoor table, waiting. I texted Vanessa, asking her to meet me there, saying I had something important to discuss. She replied that she'd be there in 30 minutes. I used that time to compose myself, to organize my thoughts. I placed my architectural model, the one I'd created of our potential future home that she'd dismissed so carelessly, on the table between us. I'd retrieved it from her bookshelf the previous day, ostensibly to make some improvements. Now it would serve a different purpose. Vanessa arrived looking immaculate, as always in a designer outfit, her expression curious as she approached. She noticed the model on the table and frowned slightly. "What's this about?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "I have a supplier meeting in an hour. We need to talk," I said calmly, meeting her gaze directly. And this seemed like the right place for it. Where things began. Something in my tone must have alerted her. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Elliot, what's going on?" Without raising my voice, I told her everything. That I knew about her affair with Marcus Thornton. That I'd hired a private investigator. That I had photographic evidence of their meetings. As I spoke, I carefully placed the photos one by one beside the architectural model, creating a devastating visual contrast between the future I'd envisioned and the reality she'd chosen. Her initial reaction was shocked silence. Her perfectly composed face froze, eyes widening as she stared at the photographs. Then, as the reality of being caught settled in, she attempted to regain control, her expression shifting to casual dismissal. "You had me followed?" she asked, her voice indicating this was somehow the greater transgression. "I needed to know the truth," I replied simply. She didn't deny it, didn't apologize, didn't try to explain. She just sat there, occasionally glancing at the photos with an expression that seemed more annoyed than remorseful. The longer she remained silent, the more my controlled calm gave way to genuine anger. "Do you have nothing to say?" I finally asked. That's when she did something I never expected. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut through me like a blade. "What do you want me to say, Elliot?" She straightened in her chair, suddenly radiating condescension. Yes, I've been seeing Marcus. So what? It was just some excitement, just physical. It doesn't mean anything. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. Let's be realistic here. Do you really think you can do better than me? A mid-level architect from the suburbs, with your little sustainable design principles and IKEA furniture, she gestured at the model home. This cute little dream house? Please. You should be grateful I gave you the time of day. Do you know how many men would kill to be with someone like me? Marcus drives a Maserati and owns 3 properties downtown. As she spoke, her hand swept across the table, deliberately knocking over my architectural model. It fell to the ground, parts of it breaking on impact. The small trees I'd carefully crafted scattered across the pavement. Wake up, Elliot. You were lucky to have me at all. I'm way out of your league, and you know it. She smiled coldly. We can move past this. I forgive you for the private investigator thing. That was creepy, but I understand you were feeling insecure. I stared at her in stunned silence, then at my broken model on the ground. The miniature house I'd designed for us, with its sustainable features, the studio space for my projects, the garden she'd once mentioned wanting, lay partially destroyed at our feet. It was the perfect metaphor for our relationship. Something broke free inside me, not just anger, but a clarifying rage that burned away all confusion. I'd never felt anything like it before. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the pavement, drawing looks from nearby tables. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice low and steady. This relationship isn't in my league. I deserve someone who values honesty, respect, and true connection, all things you clearly know nothing about. Your beauty is just a facade, Vanessa, covering something ugly and hollow. I don't want you in my life anymore. I gathered the photographs, leaving the broken model on the ground. Keep the pieces if you want. It's all that's left anyway. And then I walked away. No dramatic exit. No further words. I simply left her sitting there, surrounded by the fragments of the future I'd once designed for us, in full view of the cafe patrons who had witnessed everything. I spent that night at my friend David's architecture firm. He had a comfortable couch in his office and didn't ask questions when I called, needing a place to stay. I lay there in the darkened office space, surrounded by blueprints and design samples, staring at the ceiling. The exposed beams above me seemed more honest, more structurally sound than anything in my relationship had been. I replayed the confrontation in my mind repeatedly, still shocked by the coldness of her response and the deliberate way she'd destroyed my model. What hurt most wasn't that she'd cheated, though that was painful enough, but that she genuinely believed I should feel privileged to be with her regardless of how she treated me. The next morning, I went back to our apartment to collect some essential belongings. I'd hoped Vanessa would be at the boutique, but when I arrived, her car was still in the parking spot. Taking a deep breath, I used my key and entered. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. Though her makeup was flawless as always, I could tell from the slight puffiness around her eyes that she'd been crying. When she looked up, however, her expression hardened into a mask of indifference. I knew you'd be back, she said with that smug little smile I'd grown to hate. Her tone suggested I'd merely thrown a childish tantrum and was now crawling back, tail between my legs. I didn't dignify her comment with a response. Moving purposefully through the apartment, I gathered clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. I collected my design materials and the drafting tools my parents had given me when I graduated from architecture school. I worked methodically, focusing on the task rather than the woman watching my every move from the doorway. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of genuine surprise. I'll come back for the rest of my things later, I replied, zipping up my duffel bag. My friend David will be with me. The disbelief on her face was almost comical, as if the concept of someone actually leaving her was so foreign it didn't compute. She stood there speechless as I walked past her to the door. Only as I was stepping into the hallway did she finally speak, muttering something under her breath that sounded like, "You'll regret this." I didn't bother asking her to repeat it. Some words aren't worth hearing twice. During the next few weeks, as I settled into a temporary apartment closer to my office, I found myself analyzing Vanessa's behavior, trying to make sense of it all. The architect in me wanted to understand the structural flaws, to see the blueprint of where things had gone wrong. Had she been seeking validation? Was our relationship just too routine? Was Marcus offering excitement I couldn't provide? The most painful theory, and probably the most accurate, was that she had always seen me as beneath her. I was the reliable, supportive partner who would adore her, but ultimately someone expendable, someone lucky to be with her at all. In her mind, my devotion was expected, while her fidelity was optional. She justified the affair to herself long before it began. Her text messages confirmed this theory. The first few were mocking and dismissive. "Are you done with your little protest yet? My patience isn't infinite. This silent treatment is so immature. Call me when you're ready to be an adult about this. Marcus thinks you're overreacting." Even he wouldn't walk away from what we had. I didn't respond to any of them. A week later, David came with me to collect the rest of my belongings. Vanessa was home, and the shock on her face when she saw us methodically emptying my shelves and closet space was profound. I think that's when reality finally hit her. I wasn't coming back. Her text tone changed dramatically after that. "Can we please just talk about this? I made a mistake. You're really going to throw away 8 months over one indiscretion?" Her final message came after I'd moved all my things out. "I hope you know you'll never find anyone like me again. Good luck finding someone who'll put up with your boring life and ridiculous idealism." I blocked her number after that. Some bridges aren't worth maintaining, even for the view of what once was. 9 months later. The months following the breakup with Vanessa were difficult, but unexpectedly productive. I threw myself into my work, channeling all that emotional energy into a series of innovative sustainable housing designs that caught the attention of several environmental organizations. My firm gave me the lead on a community center project, the very one Vanessa had dismissed so casually. It went on to win a regional award for innovative green architecture. I redesigned my living space too, creating an apartment that reflected my values: simple, authentic materials, abundant natural light, and space for my growing collection of architectural models. The emptiness I'd felt after the breakup gradually filled with professional accomplishment and renewed self-confidence. 9 months after everything fell apart, I received an invitation to a sustainable design charity event in downtown Boston. The organizers had seen my community center projects and wanted me to give a short presentation on affordable eco-friendly design solutions. It was an honor to be recognized, and I eagerly accepted. The event was held in a beautifully restored historic building with soaring ceilings and meticulous woodwork that I couldn't help but admire. As I mingled with attendees after my presentation, which had been surprisingly well received, I spotted a familiar face: Naomi Chen, who'd been in my high school graduating class 15 years ago. She was now the communications director for a major environmental no. "Elliot Reynolds," she exclaimed, approaching with genuine warmth. "That was an incredible presentation. I had no idea you'd become such an advocate for sustainable architecture." "Naomi," I smiled, pleased to see her. "Thanks for saying that. I've been following your organization's work too. The educational outreach program you developed is making real impact." We fell into easy conversation, catching up on the years since high school. Naomi had the same unpretentious intelligence I remembered, now coupled with passionate conviction about environmental causes. As we chatted, I mentioned how fulfilling it was to design buildings that aligned with my values after years of compromising for commercial clients. That reminds me so much of Adrienne, Naomi said, her eyes brightening. You remember Adrienne Walsh from our class, right? She's doing the same thing in fashion. Walked away from mainstream modeling to focus exclusively on sustainable brands. Adrienne Walsh? The name immediately conjured an image of a tall, striking girl who'd sat 2 rows ahead of me in AP English. Of course, I remember her. I heard she became quite successful in modeling. Naomi's smile broadened mysteriously. She is, but on her own terms now. Actually, she lowered her voice conspiratorially. Don't tell her I told you this, but she had the biggest crush on you in high school. I laughed in surprise. Come on, that's ridiculous. Adrienne Walsh had a crush on me? We barely spoke to each other. That's exactly why, Naomi insisted. She was too intimidated. You were so focused and serious about your architecture dreams, and she thought you'd never be interested in someone like her. She used to borrow my textbooks just to have an excuse to walk past your drafting table in the art room. The idea seemed completely absurd. Adrienne had been one of those effortlessly elegant, quietly confident girls who seemed to exist in a different social stratosphere. Not arrogant like Vanessa, but naturally poised and self-assured. We'd been friendly in the casual way of classmates, but never close. And now she was a successful international model, focused on sustainable fashion. The universe had a strange sense of humor. I'm serious, Naomi continued, noting my skepticism. She'll kill me for telling you this, but she still asks about you whenever we talk. She's in Brussels right now for a sustainable fashion exhibition, but she'll be back next month. You should reach out to her. She's still really into you, Naomi continued with genuine warmth. After all these years, if you're single and open to someone who has a hectic schedule but a genuine heart, you should definitely reach out. She asked me to check if you were at this event tonight. I spent the rest of the evening contemplating this revelation. The idea that Adrienne Walsh, someone whose career I'd occasionally followed in design magazines featuring her sustainable fashion shoots, had been interested in me all this time was difficult to process. After Vanessa's cutting final words about never finding someone like her again, there was something healing about learning that a woman with both external beauty and actual substance had seen value in me long before my professional success. Driving home that night, I kept thinking about Naomi's suggestion. What did I have to lose? The worst that could happen would be Adrienne politely letting me know she wasn't interested. And after surviving Vanessa's cruelty, even rejection seemed manageable. The next morning, I looked up Adrienne's professional Instagram account. Her feed was filled with stunning photos from sustainable fashion campaigns around the world, interspersed with behind-the-scenes glimpses of her advocacy work for ethical manufacturing practices. Her latest posts showed Brussels' historic architecture as backdrops for a celebrated eco-fashion designer's new collection. I crafted a simple message, mentioning running into Naomi and asking if she'd be interested in catching up when she returned to Boston. I asked Naomi to let Adrienne know I'd reached out, in case she didn't check messages from unfollowed accounts. And then I waited. 5 days passed with no response. I tried not to overthink it, focusing instead on finalizing designs for a new net-zero energy apartment complex. I figured Adrienne was probably busy with her Brussels project, or perhaps Naomi had misinterpreted her interest. Either way, I wasn't dwelling on it. Then one evening, as I was working late in my office, my phone lit up with an Instagram notification. Oh my gosh, Elliot! It's been so long. I can't believe Naomi ran into you at that event. Your Sustainable Community Center project looks amazing. I've actually been following your firm's work for a while now, without realizing you were behind it. Her enthusiasm practically leapt off the screen. We began messaging back and forth, catching up on 15 years of life experiences. I told her about my architectural journey, my passion for sustainable design, and briefly touched on my recent breakup without dwelling on the details. She shared stories about leaving mainstream modeling to focus exclusively on ethical fashion, her travels, and her advocacy work. After several days of increasingly lengthy messages, Adrienne suggested switching to video calls. "My thumbs are getting tired from typing novels to you," she wrote. "Plus, I'd love to actually see you while we talk. Brussels is 6 hours ahead, but I'm a night owl. Would 9 p.m. your time work?" Our first video call lasted nearly 3 hours. Seeing her animated expressions, hearing her laugh, watching her gesticulate excitedly when describing her projects, it was a completely different experience from messaging. She showed me around her temporary Brussels apartment, pointing out the 18th century architectural details she thought I'd appreciate. There was an easiness to our conversation that felt both new and familiar. These video calls became our daily ritual. Sometimes they were quick check-ins, other times, in-depth discussions about everything from architectural philosophy to childhood memories to environmental ethics. Unlike Vanessa, who'd always changed the subject when I spoke about architectural theory, Adrienne asked insightful questions and shared connections to her own work in sustainable fashion. She gave me virtual tours of Brussels' architectural landmarks between her photo shoots, her genuine appreciation for the city's design heritage evident in every observation. She showed me behind-the-scenes glimpses of her work, explaining how she was collaborating with designers who used recycled materials and ethical production methods. "I've been thinking about how we could merge our fields," she said one evening, her face glowing with enthusiasm in the dim light of her Brussels apartment. Sustainable fashion needs sustainable spaces, pop-up stores, exhibition areas, studios built with the same environmental ethics as the clothes themselves. The idea was brilliant, a perfect intersection of our professional passions. We began sketching concepts together during our calls. She with her fashion designer's eye for aesthetics, me with my technical architectural knowledge. It became a collaborative project that bridged our physical distance, giving us a shared purpose. After weeks of these connections deepening day by day, our relationship had clearly evolved beyond just reconnected friends. During one late-night call, when we were both tired enough to be completely unguarded, I decided to take a chance. "What exactly are we doing here, Adrienne?" I asked softly. "Because it feels like more than just catching up." She smiled, a touch of vulnerability in her expression. "I was wondering when you'd ask that," she said. "We're really good friends who've reconnected in a meaningful way. But I'd love to be more than that, if you would." "Would you be my girlfriend then?" I asked, feeling simultaneously adult and teenage awkward. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her smile radiant even through the slightly pixelated video. "I'd love that." The logistics of a long-distance relationship were challenging, especially with her traveling constantly for work while I was rooted in Boston with my architectural projects. But unlike my younger self, who had found long-distance relationships unbearable, I approached this one with mature patience. We were both established in careers we loved, both committed to making our connection work, despite the miles between us. 2 months into our relationship, I booked a flight to Brussels. Adrienne was scheduled to be there for 3 weeks for a major sustainable fashion exhibition, and my firm was supportive of me working remotely for 10 days. I viewed it as both a romantic visit and a professional development opportunity to study European green building practices. Brussels was even more beautiful than Adrienne's video tours had suggested. The blend of Gothic, Baroque, and Art Nouveau architecture created a living museum of design history that fascinated me professionally. But nothing compared to seeing Adrienne in person for the first time in 15 years. Waiting for me at the airport with a handmade sign reading, "Favorite Architect." The connection we'd built digitally translated seamlessly into physical reality. There was no awkwardness, no adjustment period, just a natural extension of what we'd already created across thousands of miles. She showed me her favorite architectural landmarks, and I attended her sustainable fashion exhibition, proudly watching as she discussed ethical manufacturing with industry leaders. We even collaborated professionally during my stay. The exhibition organizers had been looking for someone to redesign a historical space for upcoming sustainable fashion showcases, and Adrienne had mentioned my work. I spent 2 days meeting with them, developing preliminary concepts for a renovation that would honor the building's heritage while incorporating cutting-edge green technology. On my last evening in Brussels, we visited the Grand Place at sunset, watching the golden light play across the ornate 17th-century guild houses. I took dozens of photos, not just of the architecture, but of Adrienne against this magnificent backdrop, her joy as authentic as the historical square around us. "This visit has been perfect," she said, leaning against me as we sipped Belgian hot chocolate at a cafe overlooking the square. "I don't want it to end." "It's just the beginning," I assured her, realizing how deeply I meant those words. Back at my hotel room, I uploaded some of my favorite photos from the trip to my Instagram close friends story. Images of Adrienne at her exhibition, us exploring architectural landmarks, and collaborative design sketches we created together. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. From Vanessa. I had forgotten she was still on my close friends list on Instagram. I rarely used the platform and had blocked her everywhere else, but overlooked this one connection. "Who's that?" "Playing photographer for fashion shows now?" she wrote, adding a dismissive laughing emoji. I considered ignoring her, but instead replied simply, "That's my girlfriend." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared repeatedly over several minutes, suggesting she was drafting and redrafting responses. Finally, all she sent was a terse, "Sure." Something about her disbelief sparked a rare moment of pettiness in me. "You once said I'd never find anyone like you again, Vanessa." "You were right. Adrienne is nothing like you. She has both external beauty and internal substance. Unlike you, she values creativity over status and authenticity over appearance. How's Marcus, by the way?" She read the message, but never replied. I blocked her immediately afterward, closing that chapter permanently. Epilogue. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Adrienne and I have continued developing both our relationship and our professional collaboration. We've created a concept for sustainable retail spaces specifically designed for ethical fashion brands, merging her industry knowledge with my architectural expertise. Several companies have expressed interest in implementing our designs. The distance remains challenging, but we found a rhythm that works. I visited her on location in Milan and Copenhagen. She spent weeks at a time at my place in Boston between assignments. We're discussing a more permanent arrangement, with her making Boston her home base while maintaining her international modeling career. I've never been happier or more fulfilled, both personally and professionally. Adrienne encourages my most innovative sustainable designs, understanding the technical challenges in a way Vanessa never could. She appreciates the detailed architectural models I create, asking thoughtful questions about structural choices and environmental impacts. And beyond our professional compatibility, there's a genuine emotional connection, a partnership of equals built on mutual respect. Sometimes I think about Vanessa's parting message, that I'd never find anyone like her again. She was right, though not in the way she intended. I found someone who sees my value, who shares my core principles, who challenges me intellectually while supporting me emotionally. Someone whose external beauty is matched by internal depth. I'm even thinking about designing a ring for Adrienne, something unique and sustainable that reflects our shared values. Nothing ostentatious. That's not who we are. But meaningful in its craftsmanship and materials. I know what some people might think. He's just with her because she's a model, or long distance relationships never work out. But those superficial judgments miss the substance of what we've built together. Adrienne and I connect on levels that transcend physical appearance or geographic proximity. We share a vision not just for our relationship, but for how our respective fields can positively impact the world. It's strange how life works sometimes. If things hadn't ended so dramatically with Vanessa, I might never have attended that environmental charity event where I reconnected with Naomi, which led me back to Adrienne. What seemed like a painful ending became the foundation for something far more genuine and fulfilling. That's my story. A journey through betrayal and heartbreak that ultimately led to finding authentic love and partnership in the most unexpected place. A reminder that sometimes what appears to be failure is merely redirection towards something better than you could have imagined.